everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. This week, President Biden will pass 100 days in office. He is marking the occasion with an address to Congress and the release of his next big legislative priority. The significance of a president's first 100 days dates back to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. At the time, he used the occasion for a radio address to highlight his administration's work to end the Great Depression. Although it is an arbitrary date on the calendar, for decades, 100 days has been viewed as an evaluation point for a new president. Our latest CBS News poll shows 58% of Americans approve of the job President Biden is doing. That is about on par with where George W. Bush was after 100 days. But perhaps a sign of recent polarization. Both Presidents Biden and Trump saw half as much support from the other party compared to the ratings Presidents Bush and Obama received during their first 100 days. During his joint address to Congress Wednesday night, President Biden is expected to unveil his roughly $1.5 trillion American Families Plan. The proposal would fund free pre-kindergarten and community college, extend the child tax credit, and create a national paid leave program to pay for all of that. The administration is considering raising the top marginal income tax rate to about 40% and nearly doubling the capital gains rate for those making more than $1 million a year. According to the head of the White House Economic Council, the capital gains change is not expected to impact most of the country.
This change will only apply to 0.3% of taxpayers, which is not the top 1%. It's not even the top 0.5%. We're talking about 0.3%. That's about 500,000 households in the country that we're talking about. So for the other 997 out of 1,000 households in the country, or the other 150 million households in the country, this is not a change that will be relevant. It won't change the tax treatment of capital gains at all.
We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, Vice President Harris met with the president of Guatemala Monday. It was part of diplomatic efforts to address the root causes of migration to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection previously released data showing a record number of encounters at the border in March. Most of those people were immediately expelled from the U.S. We should know as early as next week what April's figures look like. The vice president pledged to increase U.S. aid to fix the problems forcing people to leave.
And we want to work with you to address both the acute causes as well as the root causes in a way that will bring hope to the people of Guatemala, that there will be an opportunity for them if they stay at home. The United States plans to increase relief to the region, strengthen our cooperation to manage migration in an effective, secure, and humane manner.
Ed O'Keefe, Anita Kumar, and Russell Contreras join me now. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. And Russell is a justice and race reporter for Axios. Welcome to you all. Ed, let me start with you. What do we know about the president's speech Wednesday night and plans for a travel blitz to follow?
Yeah, good to see you, Elaine. Look, drafts are still working their way through the West Wing. I saw one this afternoon that was about that thick. They're still putting the finishing touches on it. President expected to do several things in his speech. First off, of course, acknowledge that he's hitting the 100-day mark. Make a nod to what happened there at the Capitol on January 6th, that assault on democracy and how it's transformed not only the Capitol and Congress, but Washington overall. Also nod to the history. On the rostrum that night, he will be flanked by two women, the first president to ever be flanked by two women, as Vice President Harris sits next to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That's a symbolic moment and one that he's expected to dwell on. And then, as you said, he'll also talk about his infrastructure plans that he's unveiled, the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan. And those are the basis of the travel that will begin on Thursday when he goes back to Atlanta, Georgia, with the First Lady for an event that's expected to also be attended by the state's 2 new Democratic senators, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. On Friday, he'll go to Philadelphia to talk about his infrastructure plans as well, and to mark the 50th anniversary of Amtrak, his preferred mode of interstate transportation. The vice president will head to Baltimore on Thursday, Ohio on Friday, her husband to North Carolina on Friday, and they'll do more traveling next week, all designed to help pump up support for those trillion-dollar plans that he's unveiled. We also expect to hold some more bipartisan talks next week here at the White House.
We'll look forward to those and see what comes out of those. In the meantime, Anita, immigration is becoming a political liability for the administration. Our polling shows him at 57% disapproval on the issue. And you have some new reporting on how Republicans planned to attack President Biden on the border before he was even sworn in. What was the strategy, and has it worked?
What we've learned is that during the transition, so after the November election, even as President Trump didn't acknowledge that he had lost at that point, Republicans were sort of plotting to use this as an issue. And the reason they were is because the numbers were already going up at the border. They were going up during President Trump's term, slowly going up. There, because of economic issues, hurricanes in Central America. And so they could foresee that those numbers would likely increase, combined with the fact that they had heard what Joe Biden was planning on doing at the border. He outlined a number of immigration proposals, and they knew that he was going to try to reverse President Trump's policies there, stop building the wall, and that more people were likely to come. What we've actually seen is that, politically speaking, it turned out better for the Republicans than they had thought it would be. And that's because the numbers are increasing. There's a lot of criticism on President Biden on how he's responding to the issue, that the numbers are increasing. He has unaccompanied children. He's allowing unaccompanied children into the country. He's trying to quickly open shelters and get adequate space for them to be held or housed until they can find other homes. And there's some Democrats, President Biden's allies, that are frustrated with that message, that he's not doing enough to combat this message that Republicans are doing. What you're seeing now is that exactly what you just showed us on that poll and other polls that show this is one of the president's biggest vulnerabilities, and that Republicans hope it's the case, and they plan to use this issue going into the midterm election.
Well, Russell, you were in Washington last week covering a couple of significant meetings on immigration. What did those meetings cover? Is there any appetite realistically for changes to current immigration laws?
Yeah, there's a group of Republicans and Democrats who are trying to come together to create some sort of bipartisan proposal. There were some Republicans and Democrats who met last week privately to discuss what kind of things can they come to terms with. On the Republican side, they want increased enforcement, not just talking about barriers, but increased personnel. On the Democratic side, they want a pathway for citizenship for dreamers. The sticking point is, what do we do with the 11 million or so undocumented folks in the United States? This population, the Republicans tried to portray as potential Democratic voters as soon as they become citizens. But we know through recent statistics and the last election that Latinos just, if you register them to vote, they just won't walk in and vote Democratic. Some Republicans say they see some pathway for this sort of discussion that these Latinos who could become citizens in the future will be pickings for the Republicans. So there is discussions going on. I talked to the office of Representative Maria Salazar out of Florida. She's looking at proposing some sort of dignity act aimed at immigration and those migrants. So there's a broad-based discussions. I think both sides realize the clock is ticking. The Senate is in the balance. They don't know how it's going to turn out in 2022. So they're both pressured to finally get things done after 2 decades.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, Russell, that we've talked about time and time again on this program, how this topic of immigration has really stymied presidents, both Republican and Democratic presidents, who have tried to tackle this in a comprehensive way. So it'll be interesting if that bipartisan group of lawmakers is actually able to move forward and find some common ground. Meantime, Russell, I want to ask about policing, because this afternoon, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced an investigation into the Louisville Police Department after starting one into the Minneapolis PD last week. How is the Biden administration looking to take action on policing, as lawmakers are working on some legislation as well?
Well, the Biden administration thinks they're playing catch up. For the last 4 years under the Trump administration, there were no investigations into police departments for misconduct or what they call pattern of practice. So the last consent decree that was entered with the federal government was in Baltimore. Before that, you also had Albuquerque, Newark, New Jersey, Ferguson, Missouri. So for 4 years, we have not had an aggressive Justice Department investigate police departments, but also get them in front of a federal court and enter some sort of consent decree. So the Biden administration feels they're playing catch up. They've announced very clearly as soon as they took office, consent decrees will begin again. There'll be an attempt to enter them. And I think advocates for police reform are excited. They're energized because they don't believe that police departments can reform on their own. They believe the federal government or some sort of agency needs to force their hands to look and see how police and their excessive force or allegations of excessive force will be held accountable. So these first two steps are a part of a pledge that he did when he first came to office, that these investigations into troubled police departments will begin, and they can expect, especially those who have faced a number of allegations of excessive force, to enter into consent decrees in front of a federal judge.
On another topic, Ed, this morning, President Biden ordered the creation of a task force to encourage workers to join labor unions. Now, the U.S. saw the percentage of employees with union membership rise slightly in 2020 for the first time in almost 40 years. Ed, what is the president trying to do here?
Trying to make good on a campaign promise and trying to repay some of his most loyal supporters over the course of his 2020 campaign. Remember, even when he was down and out early on in the primary process, he had the support of several of the nation's largest labor unions who'd worked with him for years. The firefighters union is one that sticks out. Later on, of course, his ties to the AFL-CIO paid off. But this is essentially designed to return the favor, in essence. And he has made clear throughout his campaign and since he became president or in the transition that labor unions, that organized labor would have a say, would have a seat at the table during his administration. We've seen that in so many different ways, perhaps most notably in that when you look at the events he's held, usually virtually with quote-unquote everyday regular Americans, we find that many of them are actually members of labor unions, and they're members of the unions that were some of his earliest, biggest supporters. SEIU, the International Association of Firefighters, branches of the AFL-CIO, the teachers' unions, which of course also have close ties to his wife, who's a member of the National Education Association. So Vice President Harris, the Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, about a dozen other cabinet and administration officials will be involved in this government-wide effort to support labor unions, promote organized labor, something we saw him do earlier this year when he engaged in that notable union fight in Alabama at an Amazon plant that, of course, went south, but it was still notable to see him engage. It's that kind of work that we can expect him to continue doing on behalf of unions over the course of his presidency.
Yeah, that was really notable to see a sitting president weigh in on such a specific issue as that Bessemer, Alabama facility, as we saw that play out. Anita, over the weekend, we also saw President Biden officially recognize the massacre of Armenians in World War I as a genocide, a first from the U.S. government. Why now, and how will it impact U.S.-Turkish relations?
Well, it was a really significant move by President Biden, in part because he was making good on a campaign promise, and also because President Obama had promised to do the same thing, but he did not. And so year after year, there were people waiting for this designation that never really came, and it was something that was very disappointing to them. Obviously, there are many people that worked for President Obama who are now working for President Biden who felt that that was a mistake, that never happened. So this is sort of coming full circle. They wanted to sort of make good on that. But in the bigger picture, even beyond that, it will cause some diplomatic problems with Turkey. And, obviously the president and the White House is well aware of that. President Biden has really kept Turkey at arm's length these last few months, and he had his first call with the Turkish leader just a couple days ago where he talked about this issue. So he has really kind of put down a marker here that this isn't something that he, it's not a country that he needed to call right away, that he needed to have a great relationship with right away. Remembering that's very different than how President Trump was. He was very close to Turkey and tried to, cultivate that relationship. And President Biden is saying, look, that's not going to be the case here. And he has said in the campaign and since he's been president that he would be willing to call out countries for what their actions are on human rights, that he wanted his foreign policy to be about human rights first and foremost. So he's really showing that that's what he's going to do. Now, look, he has said over and over again, and we've talked about it here, that he wants to work with countries, even countries like Russia and China and Turkey, but that he's not going to be afraid to call them out on some certain actions, as well as try to work on them, try to work with them on other issues. So I think that's going in line with what we've seen President Biden do for the last 3 months.
All right. Ed O'Keefe, Anita Kumar, and Russell Contreras. It's going to be a busy week ahead. Thank you all very much.
Sure is.